This episode is sponsored by the free-to-play console game World of Warships Legends, and we look at the reason why the Bismarck was sent into the Atlantic and the strategic thought behind it. Most of you know about the German battleship Bismarck, its initial battle with HMS Hood and Prince of Wales, its evasion of the British forces until its steering was hit by a Swordfish Torpedo bomber from HMS Ark Royal, and its ultimate demise. Yet what rarely gets covered is the strategic and operational aspects behind sending out a battleship into the Atlantic. After all, at this point, the Atlantic, at least on the surface, was ruled by the Royal Navy, which still was the largest navy in terms of ship numbers at that time. Some might argue Bismarck's mission was a suicide mission from the get-go, and well, this indeed is a wrong assumption. Based on the previous experiences with the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, as well as with the cruiser Admiral Hipper, the Seekriegsleitung, Maritime Warfare Command, released a directive in April 1941. Referring to the operation by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, it noted, "The first battleship operation, as well as the operations of the cruiser Hipper, have demonstrated, in addition to considerable tactical successes, the substantial strategic effects that can be achieved by such a deployment of surface forces. These strategic effects extend not only to the search area chosen as the theater of operations, but also spill over into other theaters of war, Mediterranean, South Atlantic." So what was this referring to? Well, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had partaken in Operation Berlin, a commerce raid from 22nd January to 22nd of March 1941, which was very successful and sank 16 ships. Probably some of you know of the losses the German submarines inflicted, and you're probably thinking, well, that is nice, but those submarines did far more damage. Yes, in material damage indeed, but those big surface ships had a different impact. German heavy warships, battleships and cruisers sank fewer tons of British merchant shipping, but they had a more dramatic effect and, unlike the U-boats, caused the suspension of convoys. Yet what about these strategic effects that are mentioned? Well, you see, if you want to get rid of a large surface raider like a modern cruiser and especially fast battleships, you need two things: ships that are fast enough to catch them and powerful enough to engage them. This is not all, you also need to find them. And for that you can bring smaller and faster ships. But you still need your big ships, and ideally several of them, to get close enough to catch the German ships. And although the Royal Navy had a considerable number of ships, they had a large area to cover, and of course there was also the Italian Navy in the Mediterranean. As such, there was a certain presence needed there. Now you could of course pull some of your ships from convoy duty as well, but the Operation Berlin forced the Royal Navy to disperse its cruisers and battleships to protect the main shipping routes, thereby exposing them to attack by U-boats. This was also recognized by the German Maritime Command. In the first battleship operation in the Atlantic, the enemy was able to pose out two battleships and two main supply routes with one of his battleships in every case. It has been shown, however, that with this protection of his convoys, he has evidently approached the limit of what is possible for him, and that he can make his decisive reinforcement of security only if he weakens positions important to him, Mediterranean, homeland, or restricts convoy traffic. Escort by American warships or active intervention by the US will make new decisions necessary. To put it simply, if you want to hunt down one big fast ship, you need several of your own, and plenty of smaller ones to assist. And in case of Operation Berlin, that did not even work out. This brings us to the next paragraph in the directive. It must therefore be a question, on the one hand, of prompting the enemy to further fragment his forces by constant changes in his own methods of warfare and large-scale changes in the areas of operation, and on the other hand, of advancing with concentrated force against the enemy's weak points, thus created. This was very similar to what the Germans did in land warfare, where they usually set the Schwerpunkt, a weight of effort, although some translated with center of gravity or decisive point. Anyway, a definition for 1944 defines Schwerpunkt as follows. Weight of effort is formed by narrow combat sectors, increased use of heavy weapons, and replenishment of reserves and ammunition at the point where the decisive outcome is to be made. Yet at the same time they also wanted to create an anti-Schwerpunkt for the enemy, namely that the enemy would disperse his ships all over the place. Up until the introduction of the Bismarck, the instruction of the Kriegsmarine raiders was to avoid engaging enemy convoy escorts. Yet this should be changed once both the Bismarck and the Tirpitz would be available according to the directive. As soon as both battleships of the Bismarck class are available for action, it may become possible, as far as can be overlooked today, to deliberately seek combat with the escorts of enemy convoys, and after their destruction, to break up the convoys themselves. As we know, that situation never happened, since Tirpitz was not ready when the Bismarck launched, and Bismarck was lost in its first journey. There are also specific directives for the employment of the Bismarck and Prinz again from late April onwards. So let us look at those. These also discuss why the Prinz again is used with the Bismarck, since this had some drawbacks. The heavy cruiser is generally to be used in tactical conjunction with Bismarck. The disadvantages which are accepted by bringing along the cruiser with a smaller radius of action are outweighed by the advantages of increasing the search range of the formation, by the availability of a ship suitable especially for engaging light forces and screens, and by the presence of a strong torpedo armament which may prove useful both in attacking strongly secure convoys and when disengaging from superior enemy forces. It is noted that the shorter range of the Prinz again should be countered by more tankers or other measures, like diverting her from the formation to refuel. In the worst case, refueling from the tanks of the Bismarck was also mentioned as an option. The directives also noted that there was a difference to the previous instructions for the Gneisenau and Scharnhorst to not attack escorted convoys. In contrast, the battle group of the Bismarck and Prinz again should also attack escorted convoys. However, it should not be the task of the battleship Bismarck to engage equally strong opponents with a strong effort of her own, but rather to tie them up in a delaying action, if possible, by sparing her own fighting strength in such a way that it is possible for the other ships of the battle group to engage the objects of protection of the convoy. Then it was noted in bold, the main task of this operation too is the destruction of the enemy merchant shipping space, engaging enemy warships only as far as the main task necessitates and as can be done without too much risk. Now, the original area of operations was given with the complete North Atlantic, north of the equator, with the exclusion of the waters of the neutral countries explicitly noting that it was 3 nautical miles. Yet this simple instruction was changed due to political reasons, namely the United States, but also reasons related to the operations of auxiliary cruisers and supplying of submarines. It should be noted here that the Kriegsmarine pressed for the declaration of war against the United States rather early on. The next part is about the problems of finding convoys, since the known routes and exact schedules were limited. Additionally, the weather in the North Atlantic limited the view range drastically on occasion, and the spotter planes sometimes couldn't be used either. Hence, to improve the ability for proper scouting, other elements would be used. The document lists U-boats, recon ships, seaplane tenders, replenishment oilers. About the coordination with U-boats, it is noted, the course of the recent battleship operation has shown that the simultaneous operation of underwater forces and submarines in the same area of operations may be advantageous to both. For this purpose, an immediate communication capability between surface forces and submarines is necessary and should be provided for in the future. An addition to the submarine short signal booklet and boarding of the same on the ships is to be made. It is followed by some detailed instructions of how many submarines should be positioned at which operation areas, and that supply ships should also be made available to supply these submarines. Under the category recon ships, there is the mention of various ship types that can be used for scouting. Their capabilities and limitations are listed and what would be the best action for each type. Additionally, it is noted that ships that are captured during the operation can be used for such duties as well. The section about seaplane tenders is just a few lines, noting that it needs to be determined if any capable units could be made available and that the existing ships are considered to be not suited for the operation. Finally, on the use of replenishment oilers for scouting, it is noted, the use of replenishment oilers proved extremely useful in the last venture for tactical cooperation with the formation. Nevertheless, these ships should be used for this task only when all other possibilities fail. since their loss would have drastic, detrimental consequences not only for this, but also for later operations with larger formations. And in addition, valuable cargo, ammunition, is exposed as well. There's also a section about the Feindlage, the enemy situation, which includes a table with battleships, carriers, and cruisers. This is particularly interesting in two ways. First, there is no battle cruiser noted. The Hood is listed as battleship. Additionally, the rows indicate the area. Here it is interesting that the Hood is listed in West Africa, although in brackets it is noted vielleicht Heimat, maybe homeland. The last part are the instructions for the execution of the operation. They are some of special interest. If the breakthrough in the Atlantic is noted, task remains. Shortening of operation or aborting of the operation according to the situation. In carrying out the task, the destruction of enemy shipping is paramount. It is important to maintain the operational readiness of the ships. Combat with equal opponents is therefore to be avoided. Only the tying up of a single battleship, if it is operating as a cover for a convoy, can be considered, as far as tying up is possible without full engagement, and if the cruiser thereby obtains chances of success against the remaining security or against the convoy. If combat is unavoidable, it is to be conducted with full commitment. And speaking of combat with full commitment, this brings us to the sponsor of this episode, the free-to-play console game World of Warships Legends. World of Warships Legends is available to download for free from the PlayStation Store and Microsoft Store. Just click the link in the description if you want to support the channel. As such, console players can now wage war in many different warships, with stunning oceanic vistas. With HDR support on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 and Xbox One X, Xbox Series S and Xbox Series X. A new update has been launched in April 2021, which added aircraft carriers to the game, celebrating 2 years since the start of the first beta weekend. The game is a nice blend of action and outthinking your enemy in large naval battles. The new update also adds carriers, as such if you want to dive bomb your enemy, go ahead. Or you can also make him try to evade your torpedoes. The update adds 3 US and 3 Japanese carriers, including the Lexington and Shokaku. Of course, you can also slug it out at long range or dish out damage up close and personal. So if you want to join the fun, be sure to download the game for free and click the link in the description. Big thank you to World of Warships Legends for sponsoring this episode. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Special thanks to Dracheniffel for helping me out with some questions. Yet he didn't view the script, so any errors are my own. As always, sources are in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.